so much for picking us over Mr. Trump. Since I don't work at the festival, so I'm not being a shill if I say briefly as we start that on the second to last night and the last night of regular programming, I buy 40 tickets a year. I look forward to this 12 months. There are so many people here at the festival and the theater and the board tonight, so if we just have a round of applause for this amazing. And then I'll just say, I couldn't talk for about 10 minutes after I saw Carol for the first time, so I'm counting on you to be in a state of not being able to talk during the first, I'll ask a couple of questions. I'll just say I'm a professor of gender and sexuality in cinema at Northwestern, very likely none of which would be true without Todd Haynes' work. I saw Safe at about exactly Therese' age and felt when you're waiting to be evangelized by something, and Safe did that for me as a freshman in college. Felt a gold mine. I read a review that made me so mad that I applied to graduate school so I could write something that I thought would be better about it. For you, it may have been an underground bootleg of a Karen Carpenter story, or maybe you turned on HBO or saw Mildred Pierce, but you've been such an incredibly generous, eclectic, just searching filmmaker in so many ways, and we're so grateful. So, actresses talk all the time about how rare it is to have another woman as their constant frame of reference for a whole movie, not just one scene, sometimes no scenes. I wonder for you, as such a devoted and repeated teller of women's stories, what it felt like to have a full 2-hour showcase to not only work with two incredibly rich characters and performers in those parts, but even beyond that, to be in a scenario where the film keeps changing its center of gravity about who's really the protagonist. Two full subjectivities that are trading off the center of the film. So what was that like to direct and to share with all of us?
Well, it was an amazing experience. This was the first project that I made, the first film I made that really kind of came to me, as opposed to something I originated and kind of wrote and tried to develop from scratch. And when it came to me, Kate Blanchett was already attached to play Carol, and I did not know this particular Patricia Aspect novel, The Price of Salt, that it's based on. And so I had heard about it. Sandy Powell, the costume designer, was also attached to the project, and she leaked its existence to me about 6 months prior. And when they were looking for a director, and then came Liz Carlson said, would Todd read the script, asked for Steve Vachon if I would read it. I went off and I read the novel, and I read Phyllis Nage's draft of the script at that stage, and I was really bowled over by all of it. And of course, the prospect of working with Kate Blanchett again made it kind of a very easy decision for me. And I felt like it was a love story. It was, and the book described the sort of painful tunnel that we all find ourselves in when we're falling in love and trying to decode the, status, our status, and what the other person might feel in return. And so you're kind of locked inside Therese's point of view in the novel, all the way through the novel, in fact. And it made me think about how love stories that have affected me work in this very interesting way about being aligned with that more vulnerable party, the one who could get so easily destroyed. And what's so interesting about Carol is that does shift, as you said mentioned in your question, and I love that about it. And so this sort of framing device was one of the things that came out of my work with the screenwriter Phyllis, that is inspired by the film Brief Encounter, which is a film I thought of right away when I read it. Noel Coward, he wrote Brief Encounter, David Lee directed it. It's a gorgeous film about a unexpected rupture of love that occurs between two married people. So that was the framework. That was my entry into it. But then I got to pick Tourette's, so I'm very proud that
Well,
so it wasn't such an incredibly difficult thing to do, having seen Mar's work over the years. But no, both of these amazing people came to the project with such a serious commitment and interest in all of its nuance and detail and what the language was in the film and where the camera was on which side of that spectrum of love and vulnerability.
in terms of talking about the script and its development, one of the things that, who's read the book? I'm just curious when we see a show of hands who knows the price of salt. I bet after tonight there'll be even more of those things. One thing that changes is that Therese in the novel is a set designer for theater. In the movie she becomes a photographer. And beyond just being a shift in plot point or character backstory, I think people may be curious to hear how much women's photography at the middle of the century and the aesthetics of urban photography, often by women, really influenced the whole design of the film.
Yeah, it was sort of a surprise because Ed Lockman shot the film, and I'd worked with on my previous 3 projects, and the one before this was the Mildred Pierce that was broadcast on HBO as a miniseries. We shot on Super 16 for that project. Super 16 is the standard professional gauge for when you shoot on film is 35 millimeter. Super 16 is downgrading. And these days, the sophistication of technology, the stocks and the lenses are so fine-grained that you lose the grain of the beautiful cinema, the celluloid. And so I wanted to see that when it was broadcast on HDTV, and so we went to 16 millimeter. And I loved what it looked like, and so we went back to Super 16 for Carol. And it was appropriate for this interesting early end of the 1950s that I started to discover in the research that showed a New York that's on the other end of the spectrum from the Eisenhower era that we think of when we think of the 50s. It was still a city very much sort of clawing its way out of the post-war years and feeling the insecurities of the Cold War and a shift in global status. And it looked like a distressed, tired place. And so we were looking at photography and photojournalism became a really useful reference, more than the cinema of the time for me. And what we kept seeing is how many women were behind the lens. For people who may know the name Saul Leiter, he was an obvious place of reference. He's an amazing mid-century color photographer based in New York, shooting a lot of images through windows and through precipitation and dust like you see in the film. But in addition to Saul Leiter's work, there was all these women behind the lens. Ruth Orkin, Helen Levitt, Esther Bubley, and more recently we discovered the amazing stash of photographs that Vivian Maier was taking in secret during these years as well. So all of those female visions were really informative and played an interesting role in Therese's emergence as a photojournalist.
You have such an amazing historical analog too. You have so many frames of thinking about who Therese could be on the cusp of being. Since you're talking about too the distressed city, among many, many transformative performances in this movie, one of the most transformative is by the city of Cincinnati, doing a robust job of being New York City in almost every frame of the film. I think you just saw. I hope the Chamber of Commerce sends you I want to go eat at a diner in Cincinnati. I've never wanted to do that before. Really? I love. So can you tell us what it was like, especially with the budget you were working on at the time you had to make the alchemy of making Cincinnati into New York?
We were looking for where we would shoot this movie, and New York City was outside of our means in terms of transferring back to a world that looked like this for our budget. And so you do what a lot of low-budget films do, which is look at the sort of most, advantageous economic offerings, and Ohio State had just enhanced its tax rebate for film production. And it was a very attractive one for our purposes. And so we started out looking, we were thinking in Montreal, and there was even a budget that was going to take us to the UK, and that seemed a little untenable to me. So we went to Cleveland and sort of sniffed around, and then we ended up in Cincinnati. And I'd been to Cincinnati in the early 90s and remembered this really amazing city that hadn't really been gentrified by any stretch of imagination. It still had these weird, sticky, thrift stores and department stores that sold stock from the 1960s in its original packages and stuff. And we went back and found these streets that seemed untouched, And, but everything was shot there, the interiors, the exteriors. We shot some street scenes with existing signage today on the streets of Cincinnati, because it's a city with that much architectural integrity, yeah, it was really great. And the people were fantastic, and the extras, I think, are particularly authentic and natural in their movements, and sometimes union extras are like robots, and these guys were like real people. I mean, looked like real people from the research in the clothes and the hair.
Inhabiting a real place.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So my last question before I count on you to have emotionally recovered enough to find your voices is back to the actresses. I know you mentioned Kate Blanchett was attached before you even came onto the project. She is such a signal sender. She's just so infrared, mysterious signals, clear signals. There's just so much you want to read off her. And so it's so easy to feel like Therese watching her do that. And and Rudy Mora, who people may know won a Best Actress prize at the Cannes Film Festival for this amazing performance, has such a more inward kind of trajectory, I feel, on screen repeatedly. And so I'm curious, given the different acting styles, but also the power differentials, what the characters each don't know about the other, sometimes what we don't know about either one of them. Did you work with them a lot as a duo, with the three of you in conversation frequently, or was it important to keep them slightly insulated from each other?
It was both, actually. Not that it was by strategy that they were separated from each other. We had almost 2 weeks of rehearsal that was preserved in the production and pre-production, which is rare, not always the case for lower budget movies or any movies for that matter, depending on actors' availability. I mean, a lot to both Rudy and Kate and all the principals to spend this time together. And really, we just read the script and talked and discussed who these people are and what their backgrounds were. And we actually did we even eliminated. We continued to sort of remove words and lines that felt superfluous and not necessary, that might be more strongly communicated without speaking. But then they both have talked about this in our sort of Q&As that we started to do for the movie, how both of them were separate from each other through a lot of the shooting, a lot of the nature of how they're very different worlds that they occupy. And so Rudy wasn't present for the scenes in Kate's house unless she was visiting Carol. And similarly, the scenes in Richard Israel were done without Kate. And that meant that the scenes that they did have together had a kind of, or sort of underscored, and were very, there was a heightened energy and a sense of, everything mattered, all the details mattered. I think there's also the thing that happens in a movie when there's a sex scene that you have to shoot. There's a slight nervousness and an anticipation and an attempt to sort of scoff it off and say, oh no, it's fine. But it propels the sort of redirects anxieties that sort of diverts them and then redisperses them. And in a way, I think that actually adds, because the whole movie is a suspense film in some sense to when that may happen and how that will happen in the story. And I think that was true in the actual shooting of the film as well.
Okay, so you heard